Welcome everyone to this webinar, examining the state of children's rights and business in 2023. Before we begin, Her Majesty Queen Silvia of Sweden, one of our organization's founders, would like to welcome you with this video greeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of Global Child Forum's new Children's Rights and Business Benchmark. It's an honor to have all of you here today, joining us in this crucial conversation. Nearly 15 years ago, His Majesty and I embarked on a journey to address some of the most pressing challenges facing children worldwide. We recognized that the business community could play an important role in shaping a better future for the world's children. This led to the birth of Global Child Forum here at the Palace in Stockholm. One of our milestones is the creation of the world's largest benchmark on children's rights and business. This benchmark has been instrumental in helping companies develop policies and initiatives that support children. This latest benchmark report represents almost 800 companies and an astounding more than $32 trillion in revenue. This figure not only reflects significant economic power, but also the responsibility that comes with it. It is important to remember that children constitute 1/3 of the world's population. I know that many businesses have the best interests of children at heart. Leading companies have made remarkable strides in enhancing the lives of hundreds of thousands of children. They've achieved this by prioritizing child-first policies and embracing transparency. But we need to do more. And this report helps us in prioritizing and helps companies to create a brighter future for children. I do appreciate your commitment to a brighter future for our children and our world. I do wish you the best on this webinar. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I would also like to welcome you to the launch of this year's Global Child Forum Benchmark Report, and it's done in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group. My name is Katarina Mellström and I'm Secretary General of Global Child Forum. Benchmark lies at the heart of our mission because we believe that benchmarking companies against their children's rights initiatives is crucial to hold companies accountable and encourage continuous improvements, ultimately creating a safer and better world for children. Our benchmark allows companies to measure their performance against peers in their respective sectors, providing valuable insights and opportunities for growth. It is a platform for companies to not only assess their competitiveness, but also to learn from others, enhancing their scores. All our data is free of charge, and it's also accessible to the financial sector, enabling them to put pressure on companies to prioritize children's rights. While we always aim to highlight progress, this year we're compelled to sound an alarm. In times of global challenges like conflicts, climate crisis, and rising living costs, we observe a concerning trend, a collective decline in companies' impact on children. And this raises the critical question of whether the world's largest corporations prioritize short-term profits at the expense of children's long-term well-being. I encourage you to explore our benchmark report on our website. As leaders, investors, commentators, or consumers, you can influence in this complex landscape. We are here to help you to drive change, and we stand ready to assist you in channeling your commitment. My colleague Adrian will put our contact details in the chat box should you have any questions about the benchmark or any other aspects of our work. So with that, I would like to start today's seminar by welcoming Nina Wollmer, Senior Children's Rights and Business Specialist at Global Child Forum, alongside Simon Pellas, Project Leader at Boston Consulting Group. Welcome, and let's get started.
Thank you, Katarina. It's a pleasure to be here today to present these results together with Simon. And I would first just like to take the time to acknowledge that this has been a true effort of a team. And we have many people who have worked very hard since the beginning of this year to collect and analyze all of the data that we will be sharing with you today. So a huge thanks to both teams on both sides. I would also like to recognize and thank all the companies that have engaged with us and the benchmark in different ways over the year. With that, I'm going to dive into a little bit of the drier, boring stuff, if you will, about the presentation and what we will be showing you today. So I will give you the background about the study, and then Simon will take over and give you the good stuff, some of the results. So this year's report is based on a balanced sample of the 795 largest companies per revenue from the SDG 2000 list, which is assembled by the World Benchmarking Alliance. We cover 8 sectors, 6 regions, including 59 countries. In addition to this global sample, we have chosen to screen an additional set from the sectors that we have a specific focus on because of the huge impact on children's lives. And these are 220 food, beverage, and personal care companies, as well as 93 tech and telecommunications companies. And the data that we'll be showing you today, and which is in the global report, is based on the 795 companies so that we can compare across sectors. But the only place where we're not using the sample 705 companies is in the leaderboard, where we're also including those companies from the extra set that qualify. The benchmark methodology is based on recognized international frameworks and standards, mainly the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, as well as the accompanying children and business rights principles. They were developed by UN Global Compact, Save the Children, and UNICEF, and it shows how companies impact children's lives in different ways. Our indicators, 25, are scored looking at publicly available information in English, and it's scored as a 0 if we find no information, a 5 if we find general information in relation to sustainability or human rights, and a score of 10 if we find information on the topic with specific mention of children. The indicators are also divided into 4 impact areas, as you can see here in the example scorecard. So first we have governance and collaboration, where we look at the overarching integration of children's rights, for example, through the involvement of the board or collaborations with peers or expert organizations. Under workplace, we look at child labor and decent work for parents. Under marketplace, we look at responsible marketing practices as well as product and service responsibility, even when products and services are not aimed at children. And finally, under community and environment, we look at the indirect impacts on children through, for example, emissions, pollution, but also their access to quality healthcare and education. Each impact area is also divided into 3 corporate response areas based on due diligence. So first we look at whether there is a policy or a commitment on the topic, then whether there is a framework for implementation, and finally, if there is transparent reporting, for example, on compliance, or actions taken to prevent or remediate impact. These are then calculated into an impact area score, and we screen all companies across sectors against the same set of indicators, because they focus on basic respect for children's rights. But we recognize that the topics are not equally relevant for all industries. So the impact area scores are weighted for industries based on materiality when calculating the overall score. And this allows us to make comparisons across industries and sectors, which Simon will now take us to.
Thank you very much, Nina. Over to the good stuff, like you said. Before we start diving into the report and the results, I just want to say a huge thank you on behalf of BCG and myself for the opportunity to be part of this and for inviting me to the webinar today. We've had great collaboration over the past few months getting this report together, and I really look forward to sharing some of the main highlights with you, everyone on the webinar today. So we will cover only some of the main highlights today, but we encourage each and every one of you on the webinar to download and read the full report that's available on the website, because it obviously covers everything in a lot more detail than we have time to go into today. But if we start by looking at the leaderboard that you have on screen of the top 15 companies who scored the highest in this year's benchmark, it's quite interesting to see that all but one company comes from either the tech and telco sector or the food and bev sector. And to really bring this to life today, it's a great pleasure to have Sjoerd Rozing from Triodos and Sara Nordbrand from Telia actually joining us today for a discussion to share their perspectives on sort of what they've done to make the top list and what really best practices looks like in this field. Before we go on, just repeat, sort of as Katarina said just now, even though there is a general downward trend in this year's benchmark report, I would also like to say that it's encouraging to see that all but one of the top 15 companies have actually improved their scores versus 2 years ago. And actually we see that 75% of the top 100 companies showed improvement year on year. And what is this telling us? I would interpret this that once a company reaches a certain maturity, if you will, in its approach to children's rights, I think it's fair to say that improvement almost seems to be self-reinforcing and that you continue on that positive trajectory. So if we move on to the next slide and we do a quick overview of the different sectors that are included in this year's benchmark report and see how they compare against each other. We see that we have again tech and telco and food and bev in the top on the left-hand side. And that's both in terms of absolute scores and also in terms of improvement year on year. And I would say generally, we see a larger share of higher scoring companies in these two sectors. But I would also say that it's important to highlight that there is a rather wide spread of scores in these two and other sectors. And that's why the result is that we see an average score closer to 5 across the board. Then in particular, if we take a look at the tech and telco sector, it's important to not only look at the average across the whole sector, but also understanding what lies underneath that average and understanding what is included. And we can do that by looking at the different industries that each sector is made up of. And if we do that for the tech and telco sector, we see that IT, software and services, one of the sub-industries, has an average score of 4.5. And that's actually lagging behind the other industries, such as electronics at 6.9 and telecoms at 5.8. And it's actually a fact that in IT, software and services, we actually don't see any high scores of 10. And just to set the scene and bring this to life, this industry, software and services, it includes very familiar names like Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, and Netflix. And we would say that it's a bit concerning that the scores are lower in this industry, given that children and young people are very often very big consumers of these companies' products and services, and that they have a big influence on their lives and how they experience the world. And also, even when children are not the direct target customer of these companies, it's a fact that they are still often exposed to these companies' marketing practices and their products. So we would say that it's very important for this industry, of course, for other industries as well, to take responsibility and be more transparent on how they take action to safeguard and protect young people and minors. Another sector that I'd like to highlight as well on this slide is the energy and utility sector. As you will see, that's where we see the largest decrease by far compared to last time. It's a decrease of minus 14%. And just to set the scene, it's important to remember that this large decrease has happened during a time when revenues and profits in the energy and utility sector has actually been pretty much soaring, given the current energy and geopolitical landscape in the world. And in particular, we see that a large driver of this decrease is in relation to the community and environment impact area. And we would also say this is quite concerning, given that the energy and utility sector, almost by definition, has a major impact on the community and environment that it operates in. But not all is bad, of course. There are signs of encouragement. In the energy and utility sector, for example, we see Finland's Neste company make the top 20 list this year with a rather big jump of plus 2.6% compared to 2021. So what is this telling us? I'd say that it shows us that it is possible for a company to maintain focus on their social obligations, even in a time when the industry it operates in is in shock or in high volatility. If we then move on from sectors on to the different regions that we benchmarked and see how the different regions compare to each other. Yes, it's on screen now, good. As you will see on this scoreboard, it's interesting to note that Europe stands out as the region doing the best in this benchmark, and that's actually on several dimensions. For example, European companies perform the best in 5 out of the 8 sectors that we looked at, and they come second place in the remaining 3. And we also see in the report that Europe has the highest share of what we call leaders, meaning companies with higher scores, and a lower share of what we call beginners or companies with lower scores. And we also see that approximately half of the best scoring companies overall are European or have their operations based in Europe. So this obviously raises the question, why is Europe doing better across these dimensions? And we believe that it's most likely a combination of stricter legislation in the European region, and perhaps also higher consumer awareness or consumer pressure, if you will, on companies to take action and responsibility for children's welfare. And it's obviously great and positive and encouraging to see these good results in Europe. I would also say that it's important to note that there is still a large spread of high and low scoring companies, both in Europe and in other regions, and that we see a general sort of lack of reporting on compliance, outcome, and actions. And we believe it's safe to say that many, if not most, companies are not well prepared for the upcoming changes in EU laws on sustainability reporting that is coming in 2024, which is very, very soon. And that's since we see that companies overall in Europe and elsewhere are often lacking in reporting on identified risks, actions, and outcomes. So in summary, I'd say given that the new CSRD standards will significantly raise the bar on required reporting standards, it's very important for company leaders to review their house and act now to ensure that they stay compliant. And lastly, a quick note on the regional comparison as well. You will notice on the scoreboard that the Sub-Saharan Africa region actually stands out as the only region that improves. And it actually improves a lot by quite a big jump of plus 17%. Just a cautionary note that it's important to note that it's Sub-Saharan Africa region. It's a rather small sample size so that we don't over-index on this result. But it doesn't mean that the improved result is any less important. Quite the opposite. It's great to see the improvement in this region. And overall in this region, we see that the main improvement is mainly generally increased sort of reporting and attention awareness to sustainability and human rights overall. So, as I said, this was only a very quick view of some of the highlights in the main report, and highly encourage you all to download and read the report, as there are many more interesting insights available in the full report. And with that, Nina, I hand it back over to you to take a deeper look at one of the 4 impact areas that we've assessed.
Thank you, Simon. So, as you said, diving a little bit deeper into one of these areas, I wanted to focus on something that we see consistently again and again in our benchmarks over the years, and that is the low scores when it comes to the marketplace area. So under the marketplace, as I said before, we look at marketing products and services, but more in detail, that means that we, for example, look if there is a policy on marketing and advertising that recognizes the company's impact on children through, for example, the spread of healthy or unhealthy ideals, representation in the subjects of their images, or the use of children as photo subjects, or allows or acknowledges the power that a company has if through its platform and they can use it for positive messaging. We also look at whether products and services or marketing is identified as a material issue, and if children's specific needs and vulnerabilities are explicitly included in that concept. And finally, we also look at if you have a policy, either on marketing, products and services, do you report on your compliance in relation to this? What are the outcomes? Or the concrete actions that you have taken to improve the impact, for example, through providing guidance to parents, improving product design or marketing campaigns that support children's rights. And as you can see in this slide, we have chosen to focus here on the 4 sectors that are sort of closest to the consumer. And with the exception of a few companies, we can see here that as sectors as a whole, they are not doing great, with the highest average score from food and beverage at 3.8 out of 10. So overall, the scores are still low in this area. However, the good news that we can see here is that most of the consumer-facing sectors are actually improving their scores in this area. And that is through the indicators or the score level where they actually take children into consideration. The exception, though, is the consumer discretionary sector, which encompasses automotive, passenger travel, apparel, and footwear. And as an example, we see that in the sector, more than 70% of the companies do have a policy on product or service responsibility. However, only 13% actually look specifically at children within this and consider their needs and vulnerabilities. So what does this mean then? Well, for us, we see these low scores as an indication that children, by most companies, are not considered specifically as stakeholders to them in relation to marketing products or services. And this exposes companies both to reputational and legal damage if children should come to harm through their activities. And just a recent example of this is Meta and the cases brought against them in the US. But it's also a missed opportunity because there are real benefits in supporting children who, as we heard the Queen say, make up a third of the world's population, so huge part of the market. And this can be done through providing access to products that children need, for example, technology, use positive marketing practices, or providing products that allow children to grow happy and healthy. So all gains in putting more efforts into this area. And finally then, what can we learn from those who lead? Only 60 out of the 795 companies in the global study are leaders or high scorers. And we think that there are things that we can learn from them and see what they are doing. So first of all, they recognize children as stakeholders to their business. And they do this generally through 4 main steps. So they use existing guidelines relating to children and human rights. Sorry. Like, for example, the Children's Rights and Business Principles that help guide them in their work, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They map their impact to identify both risks and opportunities in relation to their impact on children. And they ensure a public corporate commitment to the welfare of children, and they consult with them as stakeholders, either children directly or their representatives or people who know what their needs are. And finally, they report, they act, and they follow up. This means to manage risks before they become an issue, to have an action plan in case something comes up, for example, finding child labor in your supply chain. You need to have a plan on what to do then. They are also transparent both externally and internally, and in that sense foster a culture of openness so that issues can be dealt with and be surfaced. And with that, I'd like to thank you and again encourage you to read the whole report. And I'm going to hand over to Matt, who will moderate the panel.
Thank you, Nina, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Goodwin, and I'm Head of Sustainable Investing at Global Child Forum. We are very much looking forward to continuing this dialogue, but bringing it to life with some real-life examples. I have 2 excellent panelists to help me do this today. So a very warm welcome to Sara Nordbrand, who is Head of Group Sustainability at Telia. Welcome. Welcome also to Sjoerd Rozing, who is Head of the Future Generations Fund at Triodos Investment Management. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think an excellent place to start this discussion would be to hear a little bit more about both your organizations, but also to link that to the connection to children. Sara, would you kick us off?
Yes, sure. So I represent Telia Company, and it's a leading telecommunication provider and also provider of ICT and media in the Nordics and Baltics. And in this region, we have roughly 6 million children, and they are active users of our services. And as we know, children are increasingly living their lives online. That means that they have the pleasure of learning and interacting and socializing online. But we also know that there are plenty of risks. And that is why we have been working on children's rights perspectives for many years now. It's one of our most salient human rights topics. And we have, over the years, focused both on protecting children's rights and protecting them, but also trying to empower them and also listen to them.
Thank you, Sara. And Sjoerd, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for inviting me to speak at this panel. Very pleased to be here. So I work for Triodos Investment Management, which is a Dutch asset manager, 100% focused on impact investing. And I indeed manage the Triodos Future Generations Fund. And that is, as far as I know, it's the only fund in the world that is in support of UNICEF. And I think it's one of the few funds in the world that has a specific focus on child well-being. And we do that in two ways. So the fund invests in sectors that contribute to child well-being. So that's obviously education, but also food, healthcare, water, and actually also cyber safety. And we have a clear engagement agenda focused on improving the well-being of children. And lastly, on a somewhat personal note, I have two young girls, so child well-being is pretty much on my mind 24/7.
Thank you, Sjoerd. Very nice personal reflection there as well. Staying with you then, Sjoerd, for the moment, suppose we've just heard from Simon and Nina about some of the key findings from our recent benchmark. Do you have any reflections on what they've said on some of the key findings?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, on a general level, I think the value of this report is that it makes this topic so much more visible and tangible. Simply by having the data, we can measure the topic and we can have a conversation about it. Because without it, companies, in my experience, they tend to sort of shy away from the topic. So whenever it comes, when you can put a number on it, then it becomes interesting. So I think that in itself is already very useful. And the other thing, when I was reading the report, that really stood out for me, which was also highlighted by the previous speakers, was just how little the big IT companies seem to care about children, and I was personally shocked to see that they just don't care. Almost, it's almost like that. And even if they know that children are a big consumer of their services, so that made me feel that's something that really needs to change, I think. But with this data set, we can put that on the agenda. And the other thing that I really liked is that the report, I think that was in the introduction of the report, it becomes clear that these issues, or children's rights and well-being, it's not just limited to having a policy on preventing child labor. It's much more. And what I specifically liked is the term intergenerational thinking or intergenerational focus. Because if you do that, if you think in more than just one generation, if you think about how your business will affect children, you will make different decisions. That's something that I'm very convinced about, because it makes it visible. For me as a parent, it's easier to visualize the impact of a decision now that you know that it will affect your children, and you will make different decisions. And that's that type of thinking. I think it needs to be instilled in companies. I think those things really stood out for me.
Thank you. And really interesting point about big tech, and we'll learn more about what we've seen with the Meta case that Nina mentioned earlier. So we'll learn more about how that impacts business and their investors, etc., when we see more about the case. Sara, do you have any reflections on the benchmark report, or indeed on some of the points that Sjoerd has just mentioned?
So perhaps first to echo, thanks a lot for a great report and really important work that you've done here. I can also just say that from my company's perspective, we really use this report, and we've done that for several years. It's an excellent checklist to see which areas do you need to improve on. So thanks a lot for that. And of course, it's discouraging to see the decline in scores, especially perhaps since we are under quite different and challenging circumstances right now with an economic downturn, which we know also puts children in much more vulnerable places than otherwise. So that's of course very discouraging. I also noted the low scores on big tech, although the broader industry, if you look at the tech and telecom community, came out very well and high, but definitely a concern, and we need to see more from the big tech companies. Otherwise, perhaps a quick reflection on the low scores on the marketplace. So how companies bring these perspectives into product development and also into marketing practices. That's an area where Telia has been working the past few years to really improve, also thanks to feedback and input from different children's rights organizations, where we really also have experienced firsthand the benefits and strengths of doing that for children, of course, but also for us as a company. So we started off with more of a protective focus. Of course, we want to protect children, so we focused a lot on blocking child sexual abuse materials, which is a growing problem online. Then we decided to try to listen more to children and really encourage child participation by conducting children's advisory boards to get more information about the experiences online from a child's perspective. And we use those insights to then bring that with us as we moved into the next phase and focusing on product development. So questions we asked were related to privacy concerns, healthy online behaviors, disinformation, and so on. And we've used that in order to strengthen our family offerings the past few years. So rather than just selling subscriptions and services, we're also adding good tools and guidelines. As an example, here in Sweden, we have a mobile driver's license that you as a parent can use when you kind of onboard and introduce the online world to your child. So very much a dialogue tool, so not just saying what you should do. We tend to do that as parents, but actually listen and make the child think and understand and develop sound and respectful behavior online. So I think that's just an example of how you can go from selling something, but actually using children's inputs in order to develop your offering further. So that's one example of how we have been working. And the next step we are taking now is that we're doing impact assessments on those initiatives, where we turn to stakeholders to see how effective they are, also in order to improve over time. So I think that's one example. We also see very positive feedback when we have introduced marketing guidelines and so on to be more conscious about how we depict and also messaging towards children, which you can use both internally, but also good to spread that kind of practices to other external marketing firms you might be working with to get to create greater impacts also beyond your company. So an area I would like to market as important and also, of course, important for children, but it also actually can strengthen your business in a positive way.
Thank you, Sara. Lots of really interesting stuff in there. Something that you touched on was at the very start of what you were saying is about how you look at our benchmark, etc. It would be great to get a bit more information about the value you see in the benchmark and the reports we do and how that helps you with the work that you do.
Well, it has, as I said, it has been very important over the years, and I think a key component in an ambitious child rights strategy is really to work closely with child rights organizations. Of course, to listen to children, you can do that in different types of settings. We have had the experience of using our children's advisory panels, but otherwise use child rights organizations and their perspectives. I think we think as professionals and adults that we know what's best, but my experience is that quite often you actually get different responses when you turn to children or people who work actively with them. Quite many times we've been a bit surprised about the outcome, actually.
Thank you. And Sjoerd, you mentioned a little bit about this as well, but it would be great to get a bit of a feel as well for the value you see in the benchmark. You touched on this a little bit, but it would be great to get a bit more information about that from you as well.
Yeah, sure. So for us, we are an asset manager. So for us, the data is really useful in assessing how companies that we invest in perform on child well-being topics. And specifically this year, we started an engagement project on family-friendly work policies. And within the benchmark, there's data about how different companies score. So that data in itself helped us a lot with assessing how the companies in our portfolio performed and where potential areas for improvement were. So, and that's very valuable, because if you use data from an ESG data vendor, you typically don't get that data. You get a generic data point about maybe human rights policy or child labor, but if you want to get a little bit more details, then simply not there. So in that sense, the benchmark for us is really valuable. So we're very happy to have access to that. And yeah, as you mentioned, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times already. The low marketplace score, that for us makes it clear that what we want to do, so make sure that companies know that children are an important stakeholder. That gives us a lot of ammunition, because the data clearly shows that, well, maybe putting it a little bit bluntly, but they don't care, or maybe they don't know. That's also a possibility. But clearly, there's a need to educate companies that children are a separate stakeholder and that you should take their interests into account, because not doing so brings with it all kinds of risks. So I think that's, for us, in that sense, it's almost an invaluable resource.
Thank you. And as Katarina mentioned earlier, this data is available to other asset managers, etc. It's all aimed to try and help them incorporate children into active ownership, investment strategies, etc. So if anyone else is listening, we're very happy to share that. Sara, coming back to you then, and thinking about the future, what are there, and what are there? What are the children's rights issues that concern you going forward in your sector?
I think, we're living in a difficult time right now with lots of crises happening simultaneously. So I think the areas around the cost of living crisis, we have an ongoing climate crisis that is also affecting children here and now. But another topic, if I would just more reflect from what we've seen in our interactions with children, is the area of misinformation. When we grew up, we had certain types of sources. It was always important to be critical towards sources. But doing that today in the online world poses extra challenges. I think it's difficult almost for all of us right now with the increased inflow of misinformation. And we did a children's advisory panel on this theme. And there we saw that they feel that they need more support within this area. And also that they are struggling quite a lot. Quite a common technique today was just to see if there are many sources saying the same thing. And as we know, that is not a good approach if you want to be critical towards sources online. So a big need for kids to be better equipped in that landscape, which in the end, of course, otherwise impacts both democratic output and the societal development as a whole. So that's an area that I think is important to look at further for my industry as well.
Mm. You've mentioned a couple of times the child advisory panel, and when we spoke before this, we spoke about children having a voice in the process. Could you tell us a bit more about the advisory panel?
Yes, so we've done it, as I said, on different themes, and the important thing here was to really ask them about their realities. So when we did one, for instance, on online gaming, we got lots of interesting insights, but we also understood that quite a lot of kids actually feel ashamed when the parents are already always complaining about stuff. And they also raise topics such as parents not always being accessible. So you get nuances, you get different types of perspective in. It's also good when we ask them not just about the realities online, but what do they think is good practices online to get children to think, and quite wise and sound output there as well. So the overall idea has been not to just think that we have the answers, but actually listen to them, and then again take those insights into our work to further develop our offerings, including support materials then to parents and teachers and so on. So that's been the underlying idea of this work.
Thank you. I mean, it's excellent work. Sjoerd, I guess on that point, you look at so many different companies in your work. Have you come across any elements of having a child voice in those companies? And if so, what does that kind of look like?
Yes. short answer, but to a very limited extent. I know of one company, which actually a company that we invest in, a Japanese company called Euglena. They have a chief future officer, which is a position filled by a young person. So she is actually, I think, in the board of that company. So there you see that children have a voice. But this is the exception, I think. And Telia is probably also an exception. There are not many companies that do that. But I very much agree with what Sara said. We as old people tend to have an idea that we know what's best for children, and that they should just follow what we say. But if you ask them, you tend to get different outcomes, and that's something that we also saw in the Netherlands a couple of months ago. We have this sort of specific day where the budget of the government is announced, and then one day before that there's like a youth budget announced. And then one of the interesting findings from that was that children are apparently very worried about financial literacy, that they have no idea what to do with money, and that's and if you think about it, that's something that's probably happening for a long time, because a lot of people, when they grow up and they have to look after their own expenses, then they end up in difficulty. So that's a topic that I think we should spend more time on as investors. It's maybe a little bit of a difficult topic, but the general point is ask. And you will probably learn something, and that is something that we should do much more, because I feel that also taking into considerations the findings from this year, that actually there's not progress, but we go backwards. That if we continue to have this, let's call it quarterly capitalism type of focus, then if we have this benchmark in 5 to 10 years from now, maybe we still be talking about the same issues. So again, companies and investors should think intergenerational, think not just about next quarter, but think about what's next for my kids and their kids, and so on and so on. And in the end, I think that type of thinking helps to address problems such as climate change and biodiversity loss, because in the end, these are all linked to the quarterly capitalism that we all know, unfortunately. So, and then, yeah, I as a parent, I worry a little bit about mobile devices. I know that's maybe not fair to Sara, but if I see how connected kids are and how potentially dangerous that is, then that as a parent, that worries me. And I'm not sure if we can do something about it, but I think that's something that probably needs more attention. And in that sense, you mentioned the mobile driver's license. Maybe I'm not putting it right, but I think that's definitely something I personally have to look into. But maybe also as an investor, it's something that's the best practice that's probably relevant for the telco companies that we invest in. So yeah, I don't know. On the one hand, there's maybe positive things happening, but I also see a lot of issues that if we don't change our thinking, that will still be around in the future.
Thank you. And I sincerely hope that we're not talking about the same issues 5 years down the line, but you never know. So let's hope not. And staying on that, Sjoerd, are there any issues that emerging from the fund that you see as a kind of future problem for children's rights? I mean, perhaps not, but
yeah, I mean, I think the topic of disinformation, I think that's a very relevant one, especially with the developments we have had this year with generative AI, where it becomes so much more easier to be uncritical of the information that you get, because the AI says it's like this, so why not I trust it? So I think that's a challenge for educators, I think. So that's something that we don't see it. It's a long-term development, I think. So we don't see it yet, but it's definitely something that that can have an effect on the companies that we invest in. That they probably have to be more of a content curator in the future, or maybe even now already, than they are today. I think that's important.
Do you have any reflections on that, Sara? I mean, perhaps not exactly your world, but on the kind of disinformation piece.
Not more than it's a growing problem, and I think you really need to stay close to kids today and talk about it in order to really find ways. And of course, schools are playing a very important role here as well. But again, I think it's good for the adult world to instruct and be supportive, but even more take the role of opening up the dialogue and also sometimes learning from your kids. Another reflection I have on the excellent report is that you mentioned also that there is a portion of companies who do not really think that children's rights is a material topic to them, which sounds a bit odd in my head, but I think going forward, it's also important that we really connect the dots between the different topics, because some of us really have a direct connection to children, in my case, children as users of our services. But of course, all companies have at least an indirect connection if you have employees, if you have workers in your supply chain, and if you are emitting CO2 emissions, given the connection to the future of kids and climate change and so on. So I think looking at the emerging topics will be very important going forward, but also to connect the dots between the various topics and realize the connection that you actually have to children, no matter the industry or the company size.
Yeah, thank you. Before we wrap up, do either of you have any other points you want to add, or anything else that sort of sprung to mind? You don't have to. This isn't a trick question.
Thanks again for a great report, and interesting to hear about your funds as well, Sjoerd.
Yeah, and I would say almost likewise, but indeed great to be part of this discussion and also to learn about how Telia tackles these issues. So yeah, very useful 60 minutes, I think.
And from my perspective, thank you both so much for your valuable insights and leadership in this field. As we conclude the webinar, I'd like to share some important information. You can access and compare all company scores on our website. We encourage companies to share their scores via the communications channels, and we offer a communications toolkit on our website to help you convey your commitment to children's rights. Talking transparently about this is a really good way to add to the dialogue and to show your customers, investors, employees, and other stakeholders that you take your commitment to children's rights seriously. Hosting this webinar has been a pleasure. We appreciate everyone's contributions and participation, and we hope you reach out to us with any questions or comments that you may have. Have a wonderful afternoon, and goodbye.